Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Josh Rondeau. Coach Rondeau is the owner of World Beater Barbell Club. He was the head strength and conditioning coach at Mc Duffie School in Granby, Massachusetts before COVID. And prior to that, he handled football and track at South Hadley High School. Coach Rondeau is the inventor of the hook bar and author of High School Barbell Club, a great book to lay the foundation for new lifters and coaches. His professional career has been focused on serving others while maintaining a high level of training and professionalism that has had a direct positive effect on the quality lives around him. He has demonstrated this throughout his life. Rondeau was a firefighter for the South Hadley Fire District, and he served in the Navy, receiving honors as Petty Officer of the Year in 2007, while also receiving 7 Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medals. Coach Rondeau has his Bachelors in Kinesiology from Concordia University of Chicago. So welcome to the show, Coach.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. I had some time to read your book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's a really good guide to getting athletes started and maybe even a new coach started in the right direction. What kind of prompted you to sit down and write that?
So for me, working in public schools, the biggest issue I noticed consistently was just the lack of knowledge in general from people who were already in strength and conditioning roles. They weren't necessarily strength and conditioning coaches, but they might have been, a teacher who was the offensive coordinator or, somebody just kind of volunteering, and they really were getting programs off YouTube or looking at what collegiate programs were doing and trying to implement those with, kids in 9th and 10th grade. So it's kind of like, well, maybe we should have something that's just a fundamental book for a kid to read, to learn how to train if they didn't have a coach, or somebody who's filling in that role who, is sort of there by proxy, who wouldn't have been there by their own volition, but they kind of knew they needed a weightlifting program. And I looked around as there's not a lot of resources in that department. There's a lot of great resources for people who want to lift, know they want to lift, or competing in lifting. So my book was basically just an idea to get you started. And then if you obviously remember looking through it, pointed you to a lot of other resources. So it recommended programs that would be, towards the advanced or intermediate.
I did notice that in the book that Justin Kavanaugh wrote the foreword, and
Yep.
you did mention quite a few great resources for people, and sometimes they don't know where to start looking. So if nothing else from the book, it does give a roadmap or a blueprint on some books to buy and get an athlete or a coach in the right direction.
Yeah. That's kind of where I was going with it. Like the thought was, what books were influential for me? What did I learn from them? I've learned a tremendous amount from Justin. I worked his NFL Combine prep in 2018. So I got to kind of see him firsthand. And then when I told him, hey, I was going to be writing a book, he was like, oh, I'd love to write the forward to it. And, he and I have a very good relationship. He, if you ever get a chance to see him speak, it's great. He does Swiss. I think he's actually going to be a presenter this year as well. So I've seen him speak in Richmond, at the Central Virginia Sports Performance Seminar, I believe. And then obviously at Swiss in 2018, and then spending the week with him. So he has a really good eye for what talent is at the top level. So it was really nice for him to kind of step in and be like, I'd love to write your forward. So I think that shows his character. He's not too big for any endeavor, especially if it's people that he recognizes are doing a good job.
Yeah, that is a testament, because he could have very easily said, yeah, whenever you come out with it, let me know.
Yeah, no, he was cool right away with it. Like, yeah, tell me how long you want it. And I was like, just write whatever you want, Justin. And then obviously he did. So he's a great guy, and I highly recommend checking out anything Coach Cav does.
I, for the second time, just read his book, Man Up. I had it on the
Great book.
shelf, and I had it on the shelf, and then seeing his forward in your book, I pulled it back down and reread it.
Yeah, it's right over here behind me on the shelf with, I don't know, it's kind of blurry, but there's like 300 books up there. And his is always a good one to turn back to just for the lessons in terms of how to mentally approach situations that are difficult.
Yes, and sometimes just starting mentally is the first step. That might be the hardest step in a lot of cases, is getting your mind right to take on whatever you're getting ready to take on.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think people have misconceptions about starting something, and then that leads to them pushing it off, whatever it is, whether it's strength based, performance based, just in terms of life goals. It's a lot easier to just figure it out as you go than overthink it and put it off for a long time. I think we're all guilty of that to some extent. We go, oh, if I would have done this 5 years ago, where would I be? But we all go through what we go through to be where we're at, and that's life.
I've actually got to do a persuasive speech for a class I'm taking, and that was the look I was going to take is, uh, setting the goal, building the plan, using mental visualization and imagery to kind of help see how that's going to fall in so that you're prepared for pitfalls, and then have a plan and then execute. And hopefully you limit anxiety, but you're able to take on bigger challenges because you were prepared for what was coming, at least mentally.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the best way to summarize it. I think I don't think I could have said it better myself.
In some of the schools you've worked with, there's been limited resources, so you've had to make do with what was there,
Yeah,
utilizing the resources and running programs that fit. It's not necessarily the program you want, it's more of the program that the facility allows. Would you kind of agree with that?
yeah, and I think that's um kind of a reflection on where you're at too with certain programs. You're not going to try to run the most advanced stuff with the youngest kids. You know what I mean? They're kind of they're going to need a basic program. They're going to need a Bill Star 5x5 or a 5-3-1, and that's going to lead them to where they go. And you can do that with a straight bar and dumbbells.
Yeah, you don't want to kind of get too far down the road until you have to. What works that's simple is going to be really effective for a very long time.
Yeah, agreed.
Now, we talked about the Bill Starr ideology. I looked into that a little bit. It's a 5x5 program that's very effective.
It was the first, I believe, documented 5x5 with any structure. That was his claim to fame. He wrote "The Strongest Shall Survive" while after he had coached for the Baltimore Colts and then obviously Hawaii, and then he wrote "Defying Gravity," which is a lot more towards the specifics of competitive lifting, whether it be powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting. But the 5x5 he used with Johnny Unitas and all these guys when they won Super Bowl V, I believe.
And that was pre any notions that weightlifting would actually carry over to the field. He was a pioneer at that point.
He was the first. Again, I'm don't quote me, but I believe the first paid NFL strength coach. The Chargers in 1963-64 also started implementing strength training, and they won the AFL championship that year. So we're in the point where strength training was a novelty, if you will. It was a gimmick. It was the newest trend, and only the smartest people looked at it as a value, whereas it was a preconceived notion that it was going to make you slow, muscle bound. And I believe Boyd Epley was starting his stuff with Nebraska in that same time frame. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was all in the mid 60s to early 70s was when the inception of this stuff started trying to come about.
That would be about right because he was right there at the split between Devaney and Osborne. And
Yep.
I believe Devaney told him, if you make one of my players slower, you're fired.
Correct. And that's actually the book's right behind me. It is The Path to Athletic the Path to Athletic Power by Boyd Epley. He says that right in the book very early on. He says that was what I was told upon being hired. If I hurt anybody, I'm done. This whole program's gone. So he really had to, set up a program and monitor where these guys were so that nothing resulted in the weight room anyway. I mean, you're going to see injuries in sports and other things that are obviously variables you can't really, control, but he really had to make sure he was protecting those assets, if you will.
Yeah, I have that book, and it's a great book. Now, I know he was kind of against accommodating resistance in the book, and that's kind of proven to be effective, but a lot of his ideas still carry as much weight today as they did when he wrote it.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I look at stuff moving forward. Like, you're going to see this is what we want to do, this is what you shouldn't do, and then you'll read somebody else's work and it'll be contradictory to that. But you have to kind of look where they were at that time frame, what their thought process was, why they didn't do it, and that's part of the reason why I wrote High School Barbell Club. If we're doubling back to it, you're going to see a lot of information from certain people where they'll die on that hill and say this is the only way to get strong or this is the only methodology. That's bullshit in my opinion. I think there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. Are there programs that are better than others? Absolutely. But the biggest thing I think is individual buy-in and then team buy-in, getting people to believe in what you're doing. So you might have somebody who says, I don't like AR. Can they still get stronger without it? Absolutely. But then you're going to find people who are like, we want to use accommodating resistance, and will you get stronger using that? Yes. So, if you've been training long enough, you've been around the block, you've seen stuff comes in waves. There was a time where people thought GVT was the best thing ever invented. So it's, it's all the good programs that are effective, they have more of a guideline, good movement competency, program that progresses. I mean, even if you look at conjugate progresses. You're going to come back to that variation at some point, and you're going to try to beat it. That's a progression. You've done it before. It's not just randomized movements. You're taking exercises that you need when you get to that level of what's going to help you develop the big competitive lift. So there's a lot of ways to get strong, and I think that's more of a personal thing. Like if you're kind of figuring out what you want to do or what your resources are at the school, you might not be able to use bands and chains or weight releases. You might be able to.
Another forward-thinking idea that was in that book, and I believe Zach Duvall had actually commented on it, is they were one of the first to reevaluate conditioning and player health and making that where it was more adaptable to what they were doing as opposed to grinding players in the ground.
Yeah, which was common in football, right? You let's have linemen run gassers. Like, why don't you have them, perform the demands of what the game is going to ask them to do in preparation for it. We don't need them to be sprinters. We don't need them to be running backs or wide receivers. We need them to be able to be as explosive and as strong as they possibly can in terms of moving the opposition for what the average play in the NFL is 4 seconds. A 30-second gasser is not going to, equal the equivalency of 4 seconds of hard work. So, yeah, I think Nebraska was really big on that, and that's why they were so successful. I mean, they were dominant for quite some time in college football. They were always putting out a good product when I was growing up, and they looked at what their valuation was for their needs, and they said, okay, we need to do this. We're going to implement it. So, like you said, it's what works for you in that moment. It's what works for the people around you. Is my take.
So, adding on to that, guys like Bill Starr and Boyd Epley and Zach Duvall, what does it take personally to step away, look at things that most people are doing in a new idea, a new way, and challenge the status quo to become the legends they became?
That's a great question. You're basically asking a guy who would be painting by numbers to evaluate, the greatest Renaissance painters of all time. With my opinion on that, but I think all of these people had one thing in common, and that was their love and passion for what they were doing. And I think that's what yields the biggest results. They were looking at it and saying, I love my job. I love what I do. How can I be better at it? How can I learn more? And that quest for knowledge, I think, is what propelled them to come up with ideas that were maybe out of the box at that time frame. So again, I can't elaborate on the greatest minds in strength training. They've got ideas that I probably couldn't even comprehend, but I think it was just a devotion to their craft. I think it was a devotion to, I want to improve the people around me, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do in terms of finding information, traveling, asking the right questions, asking the wrong questions, figuring out what the right questions are. You know what I mean? It's a love and a motivation to take something that you care about and see it go further. That's what I would, assume they all had in common.
So looking at that and talking about some different things we have, I mean, we have become so advanced in a lot of ways. What we understand about training, we have really pushed the envelope in a lot of directions. But as you look out across the world, we're seeing a lot of poor countries producing great athletes. The Dominican, they're really challenging the baseball world. They don't have anything we have. We're sending resources down there to try to teach them to be like us. Well, do we want them to be like us? Because we're going down there to get them because they're not like us. What are these poorer countries without the resources finding out that we've forgotten?
What was it? Ivan Ajedoviv? Was he the guy in Bulgaria? That was the Bulgarian strength coach. He had this great quote. They asked him about the attrition rate of the program, and I think it was something like 70%. Again, I'm paraphrasing, I've read this stuff a long time ago, but he said when you go to war, you expect to lose soldiers. The baseline of that is grit. They knew they had to compete with the Soviet powerhouse. They knew they were a small country. They knew they didn't have the financial resources or the talent pool to draw from. So what they say, well, we're going to train harder than everybody around us. And I think when you see these countries that maybe not have the resources and strength and conditioning available to everyone, they have grit. Pedro Martinez grew up throwing baby doll heads and bottle caps, and he became one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. And it's like, well, why? Well, was there natural talent there? Of course, but did he want it? Yes. And that's a fundamental thing I think we miss out on, being in a place where we have, a high level of comfort. When I was deployed, I went to multiple countries in Africa: Ghana, Togo, Gabon, Guinea, Senegal, Morocco, Cape Verde, and everyone there, all the kids that played sports, they ran all the time. And that was sort of a way to get out of poverty. That was sort of a way to either end up on a really good soccer team. Obviously, they call it football there, but they worked really hard because they knew this was an opportunity for them, and it was one of the only ones in terms of an athletic endeavor. And you see these guys come over and they dominate marathons and other races, and you go, well, they don't have the technology over there. Well, no, they have the will to win. They work all the time. While their competition is sleeping, they're working. So I think it's great. It's tenacity, and it's the opportunity to change your station in life, I guess. I think that's what I would say separates uh, other countries from us. I think we have a lot of comfort here. You want to order food to your house, you got Uber Eats. You want to watch a television show with no commercials, you just stream it. So we have a lot of comfort here, and it's brought a lot of great advances in terms of finding information, but you still got to have that will to work. And I think when you're uncomfortable, you work pretty damn hard to get comfortable.
Opportunity creates a little bit of complacency. The more opportunity there is, the less maybe it means. I thought about that a little bit as well. There's a team of something that these athletes now can play on without pushing the envelope, if that's how they want to participate. In the Dominican, if you want to make it out, you better be the best in your country.
Yeah, I mean, we start guys off with they have a pitch count. They know how many balls they're going to throw. We don't want to burn people out. We don't want to overwork them. And I think there's some intelligence to that. I'm not going to sit here and say it's insane, but when you don't have those systems in place to protect their assets or developing players, you get guys who are used to throwing a lot more, and then they come in and the demands are not more than they're prepared for. I think when you're trying to give kids sports specific goals right away, early on, oh, my kid's going to be X, Y, and Z, they're missing out on the opportunity for a lot more general physical preparedness, and they're not going to develop that fifth gear maybe of mental toughness. They're not going to be able to kind of push through those zones because they've never had to. You don't want to step out on the mound, right? We use baseball as the analogy, with the bases loaded and have to throw your way out of it if you haven't had to do that, or haven't had to have that sort of volume of work in front of you. So preparation, I think, is a big point for it, right? The body adapts to all the stimulus imposed upon it. So if you're used to tough situations, you're going to start to thrive in them. If you're not, you're going to have to develop through those situations, and that's going to take time, and you're probably going to make some mistakes. There's going to be error in that process. There's error in every process.
We both know kids, and you have a gym, I have a gym. They want to lift heavy all the time. That's kind of what they want to walk in and do. They want to see how much they can lift at any given moment. So tempering the work down to create a well-rounded athlete, how do you kind of get them where they understand all of the work that's needed?
I think, you're absolutely right. I have a guy in the gym he just competed on Saturday. He went 9 for 9. He had a 65 pound bench PR and an 85-pound meet total PR, and we just did what we needed to do to be successful on that day in preparation. It took years to get him to get that to that point in understanding, because it's like, well, if I want to get stronger, I have to train harder, right? It's like, yes, you do, but it's a long-term systemic build. Your first year and your fifth year of training are going to look very different. You're going to be hitting different numbers. So I think constantly having the long-term goal explained to the kids, letting them know we're going to be at this point at some point, but we're not going to be there today, and we don't need to be there today. That takes time, right? Because it's a status thing. When you first start coming to the gym, you're like, oh, I lifted X, Y, and Z. And I think it is still, as everybody wants to be as strong as they possibly can. But I think letting them know, hey, we're going to get there, but we have to do the groundwork to get there, and we have to keep you having as little or no injuries as possible, right? We want to keep you as healthy as we can, because when you're healthy, that's when you can reach the next milestone, the next step. When you're injured, that deviates from the plan. That takes time away from it. And so it's tough. I think always having the long-term goals kind of out there, letting them know what the expectation is. And you got to be on them the first couple of years to throttle back, but they'll get to that point. When they start seeing the success, I think that's where it's like, okay, I understand a 5-pound PR right now is more valuable than a 50-pound PR, because that 50-pound PR, I might go all out, and now it's going to take me another year to even see progress there. But if I've sustained continuous progress where I'm getting, 5, 10s, whatever, you might ellipse that 50-pound PR in that time frame, and the expectation for success and continued success is there. So
We were all kids once, and we understand what it's like to be a little anti-authoritarian and challenge ideas of adults and question what they know and how much they know. So with kids, you have to set it up where they see it before they'll believe it. As opposed to an adult, you might be able to tell them something feasible and they'll be like, okay, I can see that. Not with kids. Is that what you've found?
yeah, I think being in a culture where the people that are coaching you are capable, they've done things. I think there's value to that. But I also think having them know that somebody cares and cares about their success, that's where you kind of get over it. Instead of now you're not somebody imposing restrictions or demands. You're an ally. You're somebody who's there to try to help them achieve their goals. So I do think there is a fair amount of like, look at what the systems produce, look at the athletes that have come before you, look at what your coaches have accomplished, but also like letting them know, hey, you have the abilities to be successful. Following this plan and working progressively towards it, that's going to erase some of that friction. When you come in, you're just barking at kids. Like if somebody came and started barking at you, you're not going to want to hear it. You're going to be like, why is this guy yelling at me all the time? I think there's a point where they get to a level where they know what they're capable of. And you might need to kind of, remind them that or enforce certain stipulations if it's weight room safety or, sticking to your program or believing in the long-term goal, not going out and maxing a week before your event or, minimizing the physical stuff you do leading up to a meet. But I think putting yourself in their shoes and also, empathizing with the fact that they want to be the best they can and letting them know that you want them to be the best they can. That's how you kind of bridge that gap. And it takes time. You got to build relationships with people over the course of working with them. And I think, like I said, overall being in their corner is how you do that.
And I had listened to some podcasts with you, and that's why I kind of threw this question in. Was you were big in the counterculture with skateboarding and all that before you went to the Navy. So
Yep.
you kind of understand what it is to kind of, give the middle finger to the man. And
I don't ever like being told what to do. You know what I mean? Even if you're going to do it, and I don't know if that's just hard line in my genetics, but when you get in the military, you got to do what you're told. You know what I mean? You really kind of have to. And then you see, well, okay, there's a reason for the system in place. I may not agree with all of them, but I'm part of a team and I have other people who rely on me. And I think that aspect kind of comes in there too. And I mean, even with strength training, even with the way I kind of wrote my book, I do things differently. I always kind of have. I don't know if it's my ADHD or just the way I am as a person, but I like to do things my way. But I'm never above taking in information, evaluating that information. Like you got to ask questions, you got to read, you got to learn, you got to be willing to learn, and you got to understand that you don't have all the answers. Do I know a lot about strength training? Yeah. Are there people who know a lot more? Of course. And if I don't ask them questions, if I don't try to listen and learn from them, then I'm a fool. It's on me. I didn't do the best things I could do to be better or prepare. Even if it may not be the exact way I would have done things, you still want to get that information, and then you can kind of find a way to work it into your lifestyle or your belief system. And I've done that with Kenny Toth. He's been the most instrumental person, I think, in helping me develop and evaluate, what strength is, how to improve on it. Andre Skiba is another one. Justin Kavanaugh is another one. There's a lot of people who, Jim Wendler's a great example. I know you had him on too, and he's pretty much a counterculture guy if you think about a lot of the stuff. But everything he says makes sense. It's intelligent. He's a great person to be around, and he treats people with respect right away. I was very impressed with Jim. So it's there's you might be different, but there's also people out there who are different too. And if you can kind of take maybe a little bit of their philosophy or a little bit of their ideas rub off on you, you might be able to formulate a plan that is yours, and that's going to help you achieve your message.
So taking that into consideration, the evolution of a strength coach. I know I'm trying to talk to coaches now that don't do things the way I do things, just to hear how they do it, to see how it'll affect what I do if I was to implement that. Trying to have a little bit more of an open mind on a few things. Have you seen that progress where you're at by doing that?
For me, I've never had the luxury to turn down information. Right when I started strength training, I was like 175 pounds. And I'll give an example. Just with listening to Kenny in 4 years, I went from like a 450 squat to 800, and it's like, well, and that was in the gym, but I did 750 in a meet in single ply, and it's like, well, I might have had my own ideas how to get there, but listening to somebody who's been there or been very close to those numbers years ago, they've got at least some of the roadmap already kind of written. You're going to follow that, and then you're going to have to write your own roadmap based from wherever their endpoint was. So I think you always have to approach things with an open mind. You're going to find stuff that's just not going to work, and it may not be your cup of tea. But I think for the most part, when you ask questions, you're going to always learn something. And you're going to learn something from people you don't even expect to learn. You're going to see certain athletes that you coach, and you might say, "Oh, the way they're doing this or the way they're doing that movement, does it still meet the criteria of what the movement should look like?" Oh, okay. But they might do this because they have, pre-existing injury. They might favor a neutral grip and pull downs consistently over a normal one, or they might want to, have a supinated grip, and you go, okay, well, then you try it and you go, oh, there's something here. I might not use it every time, but I might throw this variation in. And I think that's kind of it. You have to have an open mind. You have to think outside the box. You have to read a lot. You have to ask questions, and you have to be around people with different ideologies. Because even if you find one thing in that book or from that person and you implement it, it's like, I'll quote Kenny on this one. It's great with the specialty bars that he has. He's got tons of them. But his justification for buying all these bars and sometimes multiple versions of them just from different manufacturers were, if I was an auto mechanic, I might have a tool I only use one time a year. But if I need that tool, I want to be able to have it. I want to be able to grab it. I want to be able to use it. So it's kind of that approach. It may not always be something you use, but you might find a use for it in a specific situation, and that's going to give you benefit. So asking those questions and listening is going to get you that information a lot quicker than trying to stumble through everything yourself. I think you should read and you should take it upon yourself, but life's short and you only have so much time to dedicate to the tasks you want to achieve.
And sometimes making a phone call is a lot quicker than trying to find the correct book.
Yeah. Or trying to run a program and giving up eight or 10 or 15 or whatever weeks of your life to turn around and say, oh, I could have done this or I should have done that. So
Taking the weight room into the field, you took on some of these roles that maybe you didn't have a whole lot of prior knowledge to, maybe track and maybe even some of football. So how has that adapted how you train in the weight room after seeing how some of these sports are played and coached?
well, like we said earlier, anytime you do a new process, there's error, there's trial and error. You're going to make mistakes, and then you're going to hit one out of the park, and you're going to go, okay, this worked, this didn't. I think the fundamental aspects of doing strength coaching for track athletes, strength coaching for football athletes, they want to win, right? They want to win at their respective goals. So you should turn around and have a pretty firm understanding of what they're trying to accomplish, and then you go backwards from there. If you're trying to increase the distance you're throwing the shot or the discus, You got to say, okay, well, this is the end result. How do we get there? If you're, trying to win football games, you've got to turn around and say, what strength, variables do we need at certain positions to be able to win? So, you're always going to be in situations where goals are different. I think first evaluating what the end result is and then going backwards is a good starting place.
Now, I heard you talk about this a little bit, and I've often wondered myself, but front squatting athletes, you're kind of, and I'm the same way, you're kind of okay with either a catch hold or a crossed arm hold. The overall effect is to get the front squat in. Is that kind of how you look at it also?
I mean, we use the Mars bar for front squats. Whatever's gonna allow that anterior load to not turn around and be a contraindication later, a problem later. If your front rack position is affecting or hurting your wrists, and then you got to bench or you got to obviously do other movements. I see the value in doing it the Olympic way, especially if you're competing in Olympic weightlifting. If that's your goal, then yes, absolutely practice the clean style rack for the front squat. Train the clean, train all variations of it because that's your sport. But if you're not going to be evaluated on that stimulus, but we can turn around and make it a little bit easier in terms of user friendly, picking the lift up quicker, understanding the lift, and seeing the benefits of it, then why wouldn't you use a specialty bar? You got to think like West Side Barbell, they use specialty bars all the time, and they were one of the most, if not the most dominant gym in terms of strength training. So again, it's meeting athletes where they are. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. I think if you have the tools, you use the tools. If it's easier for an athlete to cross their arms and still put up a great front squat, do that. If they have, you got to remember, every person's different. You're going to have different limb lengths. You're going to have kids with pre-existing injuries or adults with pre-existing injuries. If something is hurting them, we probably shouldn't be doing it, right? If it's gonna minimize our potential to achieve our goal, well, let's find another way to achieve our goal that might not be as taxing or detrimental to their performance in other areas. So yeah, I'm with do what works. You know what I mean? It's a lot easier to see the benefit of it quickly if you can do it without having pain or other issues resulting.
Yeah, and you can still front squat them with the cross arm front squat while you're building the mobility of the rack.
Exactly.
Now you've worked in both areas. You've worked in a school and you've worked privately. And this is the question I have because it's the school in town has added a strength and conditioning coach, so the athletes are trying to find the balance between what they do out here and what they do in school.
Mm-hmm.
How have you been able to help athletes balance the school to the private work?
I've had the luxury of dealing with all my guys in the off season. So when they come with me during the breaks, we were able to do what we want to do, and that's reaped benefits. I mean, out of the garage out of World Beater, we've had 10 kids play high school and then go on to play D1, D2, or D3. So I think having that luxury has been helpful, but a lot of times you're going to see schools write programs for athletes, and the athlete might say, what I was doing with you works better. Or, there's a couple aspects here I want to incorporate, and that's something you can do. I mean, I had a baseball player. I'm not going to mention schools. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but he got his program and he was like, this is garbage. Can we just do what you're doing? And then he came back bigger and stronger, and they go, oh, you really, really hitting the program. He's like, yeah, the program is great. So it's like, you're gonna find some stuff that's great in those programs and maybe some stuff that's not. But I think letting them know you don't want to be a source of conflict. If it's really a big deal, have them run the program they're assigned. If it's something that is very important for their development, if they're going to a good school. But generally, I've had the luxury of kind of doing my own thing. And then when they get in season, a lot of them have kind of been able to take their own methods that were kind of implemented here and throwing them in there. So it's, they were cooking with both recipes, we'll say.
I think you think about this the way I do. Your main lifts are your main lifts, and you program the assistance work to build the main lifts. not necessarily the main lift to build the main lift. Am I kind of interpreting that right from what I've heard you speak about before?
I think they both meet. I think they both are two sides of a coin. You're going to see some people who are going to benefit from the main lift, and doing the main lift is going to help the main lift, and then you're going to see other people who the auxiliary lifts or the assistance lifts help build that. I look at the main lifts as a course. Like if you're eating dinner, that's your steak and your potato. The assistance lifts are, your vegetables and eventually your dessert. So yeah, generally that's the approach. And that's similar to a lot of stuff. Westside would have their main conjugate movement and then assistance lifts that build it. I mean, even Bill Starr was doing that with his 5x5 and the strongest shall survive. They were doing the squat, the clean, and the bench, and then he eventually, once they became advanced, started throwing in the overhead press and the behind the neck press on the medium and light day of benching. But they were always doing, leg curls and back extensions because they knew they supported the main goals of the clean variations and the squats they did. So I think there's a fair balance. I think some people are going to do great with the assistance lift, especially if it's new stimulus. They're going to get, oh, look at this, and it's going to put pounds on there just because they're doing it again. But I generally try to have the assistance lifts develop or help develop the main lift. So it's two sides of the same coin.
And they can work in conjunction to develop each other.
They should, yeah. I mean, that's the goal, right? You might find assistance lift works better for athlete A than athlete B, so you might have to turn around and say, okay, we got to change the assistance lifts. But the main lifts are the main lifts for a reason. They're time tested. You know what I mean? Anybody who's ever been really strong at the clean, the squat, the bench, or the press is generally pretty strong. So the deadlift too, you know what I mean? Like the main movements, if you're pretty good at them, you're gonna have ones that are better than the others. But if you're good across the board, you're generally pretty strong.
Taking that into account, kind of what you were just talking about there, but you moved into a system that had a full body dynamic day.
Yes.
Did you like that? That's something I've kind of been looking at, and then hearing you talk about it, I'm like, that's kind of where I've been going mentally on a weekend, picking Saturday or Sunday. That's the full body dynamic day, and then the kids are ready to go back and hit the week hard.
That's just out of necessity. We didn't have the time, to run a maybe a 4 day a week program or what we were doing in the off season. So it's like, well, we have the opportunity to work. Let's get as much work as we can done that doesn't, have a negative impact on that week's game. So does it work? Yeah, I think training the different goals on a different day works. You know what I mean? Like I think if you're going to do speed work, obviously, yeah, you'd like to delineate it into an upper or lower, session. But if you only have the time to do 1 day and you say, okay, we're going to do dynamic effort as a full body, it still works. It still produces results, So it's more out of necessity. Every program's different. Every school is different. Every schedule is different. Every sport's different. They still have the same intangibles of what they need to be successful generally. But if you only have 2 days with an athlete or 3 days a week with an athlete, you're going to do whatever you're going to do. If you have 4 days, you might structure it differently. So again, really just each situation is independent. But when we did full body dynamic, we saw benefits from it. It works.
That would definitely fit well into a 3-day model. I think
Yes.
this is something that we've done for a while, and I've seen benefit. And I heard you, I think maybe on Zach Evanesh's show talking about it, but stacking volume for size. You don't think about it too much, but if you're using 40-pound dumbbells and you do 5 extra reps, you just added 200 pounds to your overall volume.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it to stack that volume?
Different points of the year obviously have different values. When you're in season, they're just trying to recover, so getting the blood moving, getting them still in to do a lift is still generally everybody I've ever talked to or any athlete I've ever worked with, they always felt better in season if they continued to train, however that looked. If you completely remove training, you're going to see, the athletes that they generally feel worse. They feel more beat up, more sluggish. So I think any chance you have to add volume consistently where it's not impacting the event is great, because especially in the beginning stages, right? Especially early on, the metabolisms for high school athletes is pretty high. Generally, these kids can't pack on weight. They need to pack on some size and muscle to be better at their sport, but also, protect them. You got a thicker neck, you got a stronger neck. And especially in contact sports. So, anytime we were in the off season, adding even small amounts of volume was good. Even if it was, like you said in that example, 5 extra reps, that worked. But there's a time, obviously, too, as you get closer to your goals, you'd rather have a fresh athlete than an athlete that may have a little bit higher volume. But generally, if the ability to add volume is there and not take away from the performance, we would do that.
And then you also discussed front end loading that volume. So getting that volume in while they're fresh.
Yeah, yep. I think you'll generally see athletes perform better when they're able to do the work. You don't want to be starting to try to add stuff later in the workout when they're already fatigued at a high level. Oh, here's my dog. You know what I mean? It's you want to do it based on obviously the goals of that season, that sport endeavor. But if you can add the volume earlier in the session, yeah, they're going to be fresher. They're going to have more energy. They're going to be able to do better, and I think acclimate to it better mentally, right? Because they're not tired, they're not beat up, they're not banged up. They feel good about what they're doing.
And this is something that builds into everything we were just talking about, but it seems like the longer I go, the more important it seems to be to me. But the repetition method for young athletes, getting all those reps in. Yeah, a lot of programs aren't 8 to 10 reps for 4 sets, but if you could front end, like we said, the volume with a repetition style movement, you can definitely hit some goals.
Yeah, and I would typically do that for assistance work. I know Louis would do that with dumbbells. You have like 3 sets. Get as many reps as you can with a certain weight over the course of those 3 sets. Trying to keep it in double digits. But obviously, as you get a little bit older and you get more beat up, you might not need the volume at 40 or 45 years old that somebody's going to need at 17 or 18. So I think it's situation specific. But again, I do think at younger guys who are trying to, well, guys and gals, people who are trying to get stronger, who are starting, I think the volume is going to help them pack on a little bit of muscle mass and just get them more familiar with the movement. And that's really the big one in the early stages, is just movement competency, knowing what feels right and what feels wrong, and that's how you avoid injury.
And that's kind of why the 1x20 method's been so successful.
Yeah, Bill Starr had a 20 rep press program, and then if you look back at super squats, that's where you saw a lot of the early 1x20 20 hard 20 set, and then he did all the 1x20 stuff. So yeah, again, it's movement competency. I think as you get more advanced or you get further along with weight, I also see the merits of why Westside breaks up their dynamic effort into triples for bench, doubles for squat, and singles for deadlift, or at least it did in the book of methods when they were using that. So it's kind of the opposite. Well, now we're taking 1 or 2 or 3 reps and we're trying to produce the best version of those. But I think early on, you do see a lot of people with the 1x20 see positive results because it just gives you more time doing that task. And the more time you do that task, the quicker you're going to adapt to that stimulus. You're going to accommodate to it. Your body's gonna understand what it needs to be doing, when you're doing that movement.
Overhead work in the athlete. Everybody has a different opinion on it. Where do you kind of fall in all of that?
I think, I just hit an overhead PR today for the first time in 5 years. So I think overhead work, especially nowadays, I think now it's more underutilized than it ever has been. And I say, you look at when the press was included in Olympic weightlifting, that was a lift they had to train, right? Guys had to train the press because it was a competitive movement. And you look at how strong these guys were and the physiques they had. The press and overhead work in general is extremely valuable. I think in powerlifting, personally, I've kind of seen a lot of deviation from it, especially in geared lifting, because guys are using boards and other things. And it's just, well, I'm not competing in this lift. I'm not going to be evaluated in this lift. But I think for athletes, it's extremely important. I think for anyone, I think overhead work is very important. I think if you could do it without getting hurt, you should do it. And I think if you are getting hurt from it, you either have a lot of miles on it or you do need it, myself included. I've been guilty of saying, whatever, but it's like anytime I do overhead work, I generally feel better. I feel stronger. I feel more capable. If that makes sense.
Yes, and if you go back to what Louis said, a guy that can overhead press 315 can bench 315.
Absolutely.
But a
And
guy that can bench 315 doesn't mean he can overhead press 315.
yes, exactly.
Plus, I think the size that a lot of those athletes need in their shoulders gets created from what we talked about earlier, either the repetition method, hypertrophy, building that armor, especially in the lateral delts, rear delts, and then the strength from the overhead press and the front delts.
It's just a lift you can't fake. You kind of look at the deadlift too, and I don't want to say it in a negative way. I'm not saying like a faking it. I'm just saying like gear supports certain lifts for a reason. You see squat suits and bench shirts add a benefit to those lifts. The deadlift gear is not. You're not getting a ton out of it. You're not getting anywhere near as much as you would be with squat, and the overhead press there's none. So obviously those lifts they're less impacted by gear. It, you need them to develop, and I think they're harder for a reason because they do have quite a bit of benefit. They do have quite a bit of yield. I mean, in football, for example, you don't see linemen lay down on a bench to push their opponent. You know what I'm saying? Like they're going to have to do that drive at the line of scrimmage standing. So inclines are very similar to that. You see a lot of the jammer arms stuff that Boyd Epley was having made through hammer strength. That's similar, but I do think overhead work is you can't get around it. Anytime you get better at pressing weights overhead, you generally get stronger.
Not talking about pressing weights. I saw pictures of it, but your cambered hook bar.
Yep.
I run a cambered bar out here. Do you find that takes a special pressing tech, not necessarily technique, but where they're thinking about pressing from? Do you think that requires more chest drive than tricep drive where that bar will get to shaking?
I think the stability component of being tight is evident right away. I think you can get away with not being as tight with a standard bar, but anything that has a big camber or sway, like you see like the earthquake bar or any of the stuff that Jim Seitzer makes with band bell, those have a high stability component involved in them too. The hook bar, just the way the camber is, when you press with it, it sways. When you squat with it, it sways. So I think a good chest drive to get it to that initial point is there, but even at the lockout, it's still unstable. So I think it's just you have to be conscious of your ability to stabilize your body as you're pressing it, even with submaximal weights.
And you call it the hook bar because inside the camber, you have different pins that you can adjust your band tension through the height that you hook the bands onto.
Yeah, and the reason that bar was invented was my buddy Ryan and I were squatting. We were doing Donnie Thompson's squat program, which is a lot of AR, and we would always drape the blue bands over the plates, which I always saw people do. You get a little bit more resistance from it, but it was such a pain in the ass to have to pull that over a stack of 45s, and then you need at least a couple of them on there because if it's on, it's not going to balance on one plate if you're not using bumpers. So the big issue was, well, we got to add the bands. I'd rather start with the bands earlier on than have to have three plates on there and then throw, 200 pounds of band tension on there. So, and it was always kind of a pain in the ass too. You had to like anchor it with two people when you're like, well, there's got to be an easier way. And that's where that came from. Just the hooks in there. But then the different variables you had. Now you have 5 options for band tension on one bar as opposed to just one, which was standard. So we kind of played with it with forward facing bands. We've used it with reverse bands. We've used it with different combinations of band chain, weight release, or everything you could possibly concoct. We've done with that thing, but I like it because there's more variable in terms of I can just keep adding bands to it. But if I'm training with somebody who is using a different level of resistance, we could just pop one band off or we can lower it a hook. Now we have, like I said, 5 options for that one band where previously we only had one. And that's kind of where it came from. So it was just like anything else. Out of necessity, we were like, this is kind of a pain in the ass, and we got to wait till we have so many plates on, and then you're getting hit with AR on top of whatever your weight jumps. We were like, well, what if we want to start with AR and then slowly add plates? So it came out of we saw an apparent need, and we went that route.
Creating consistency and exposures to achieve athletic goals. So getting kids where they show up and getting them exposures and getting them in the gym. Is there a model to that? Is there a rhyme or a reason? Do they show up because they like working with you? Do they show up because they like working with the program? What keeps them coming back when the gym doors open up?
In terms of World Beater, it's such a tight knit group where guys will, need a floor installed, and other guys in the gym will do it for free. Somebody needs tree limbs hacked down. Somebody will do that. Somebody's moving. Like, we're so tight knit in there that we've all been in each other's lives in a lot of other capacities outside of the gym. We're just, we're always a very tight knit group. We're just good friends. So I think being around people that you respect, being around people that hold you accountable, and also being accountable to help them achieve their goals, and knowing that we compete, multiple times a year, it makes it, there's a need to be there. It's not an option. Like in our gym, if somebody's not going to make a session, we'll text it. There's a calendar up there when people have family events, but generally it's like just the safety aspects. When you have guys squatting heavy weights, you need people there because something could go wrong. I think in a high school sense or an athletic sense, I think it's similar. I think it's knowing that their teammates are going to be there, knowing that people that they respect are going to be putting in the work. I think it's a lot easier to not go it alone, right? They have other people that hold them accountable, and yet they're accountable for those people's success and safety. And I think that's sort of a one hand washes the other approach where, if you're going for max, you got people there that are going to support you. If they're going for a max, you're there to support them. If you guys are on a team and your goal is to win, if everybody else is doing it, you're going to do the same stuff because you want to win too. You don't want to be that weak link where you're not putting in all the work that your teammates are. So I think it's a social aspect, but I also think it's just, you got to have the right people around you. You got to have guys that are motivated to be successful all the time. You got to have guys that want to win. You got to have guys that want to compete. You got to have guys who care about the space they're training in, the product of lifting they're putting out, and just it's a communal sense.
It's
At least from
very,
my own experience.
yes, it's very family like.
Yeah.
You hit on something right there, and it's something I've thought about a lot. The one advantage maybe we have over some high school coaches is the private setting really brings out the athletes that want it. You're not going to have a fence sitter show up to the gym. These athletes are putting in extra work, extra time, taking away from their lives when maybe they've already practiced with their team. And, a lot of athletes feel like that's good enough. But then you find them ones that go above and beyond. So it's not out of the ordinary to have a bunch of athletes from a private gym make it to the next level because they were built that way. Is that something that you've kind of noticed?
Well, I think having people that want to be there is the fundamental aspect of it. You want to have people that, they live and die by this. They care. This is their thing. And in team settings, you're not always going to find that at the lower levels. At the higher levels, you're always going to find that. You're going to find people who've made tremendous sacrifices to be where they are. But at the lower levels, you might have a kid who's just content to be on the team, and that's okay. That I'm not sitting here saying that's wrong. Like, I think it's a social aspect. I think, kids play sports to be around other kids, to learn, to develop, to find things they're good at. But I think the big aspect of having a productive environment is having people that want to fundamentally be there. Because if they don't want to be there, you're not gonna. What are you gonna? You're gonna try to lead people who just don't want to be led, and I'm not just saying that in a leadership role. Is this the analogy of, like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You want people who want to be there, and generally, I can say honestly, with a few exceptions, there's pretty much everybody's always wanted to be there. You might have the one kid who's a lower grade who doesn't understand why the team has to do this for their sport, but generally, after they do it for a little while and they see the benefits that people who are motivated and invested in are achieving, they turn around and they go, oh yeah, okay. So and you want to create an environment that's pleasant to be in. I'm not sitting here saying, it's strength training. It should be difficult. You should be challenging the athletes, but you also need to come at it and say, well, I got to meet people where they are. This kid might be a 5-star. This kid might be a 1-star, but this 1-star is giving me the effort of a 5-star. You got to let that kind of known too. Like, I see your effort. I appreciate it, and I value what you're bringing to the table. And some kids are that it's just going to be attitude. Some kids are really just going to bring attitude. But I'll tell you, you have a bunch of B+ athletes that want to be there. They might give you the best effort ever, and you might have an A+ guy who doesn't want to be there. He's not going to produce as well. So it's I think it's the environment, and I think it's about creating an environment where people want to be in.
That's the one thing I've noticed. And guys hold each other accountable. So when other athletes walk into the gym, they learn very quickly what to expect. Hey, this is how we do things here. And I know every gym has that. But when you're dealing with guys that want to put in the extra work, it definitely is heightened.
I mean, we gotta keep the guys out of the gym. That's the problem. World Beater, we gotta keep the guys from not being here all day. You know what I mean? So it's I've been very fortunate to be around the people I'm around. I'd like to take credit for it. I'd like to say I have a philosophy for it, but I think I've just been very lucky that I've been surrounded by motivated individuals.
I can agree with that very much.
Mm-hmm.
Linear versus conjugate and mixing the two. Have you found better success kind of merging them along the way, or one system over the other?
Again, this is going to be the answer I've been given all day. I feel like it's situation to situation. It's dependent upon the person. Some athletes might need a lot more linear approach with a certain lift. If they're competing in powerlifting, they might do great with conjugate in one lift very, very well. They like if they're a great squatter, they might not need to do a ton of specific work to squat. They might need just enough change in bar, box, no box, box height, whatever the different stimulus you want to implement is. But generally, they'll get better as they're doing that. And some lifts they might need a much more long-term structured approach where they're achieving milestones. And I don't know if that's mental. It could be a large part of it. Could be that they have a misconception that, well, this is the lift I'm bad at, and I'm always going to be bad at it. I think they might need more success checkpoints, if you will. They might need to hit a certain rep scheme for X, and then another rep scheme for X, and then eventually they'll get to the point where they can implement just a completely conjugate system. But I mean, even conjugate itself, when Louis was talking about doing the illegal wides, those were linear session to session when he would do them. It'd be like do this weight for this many reps, and then the next session try to add either more reps or try to get another weight for that many reps. Again, I read that a long time ago, but he was kind of implementing that with certain stimulus. So I think they work well together. And I think too, like when you're doing conjugate, there is some level of a linear component to it. Like if you know the lifts that you benefit from and you put them on a 6-month cycle or a 4-month cycle, you're going to come back to them. And your goal is to, what we try to do is just beat that variation by 5 pounds. That's it. Not 25 pounds, not 50 pounds, not 75 pounds, just 5 pounds, 5 to 10 of that variation. I mean, that's in a conjugate system. But if you think about it, it's kind of linear. Like you're charting your progress. Yes, it's not every week, it's not every session, but you turn around and you go, okay, for 4 months, I saw this lift here, and then the next 4 months I did it again, and I just upped it a little bit. There's still progression in there, and it is linear over the long course of time. So again, it's case by case. It's what each person needs. I know guys who just run straight conjugate, and they're awesome. They're dominant all the time. They're great at the lifts. And then you see other people who run linear progression, and they're strong too. So it goes back to that. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. You can't turn around and say this is the best for everybody. And some people do, especially if they're selling a program, they're going to turn around and they got to make their money. And I get that. But I think just being motivated in what you do, caring about it, and finding the lifts that, you know, whether it's assistance lifts or main lifts that drive you forward, that seem to be the stimulus that you need to achieve that goal.
Yeah, when you get deep into conjugate like West Side, those guys were elite lifters. They could make progress switching the lift every week. I don't know that the younger level high school athlete's going to see the progress switching the main lift every week. Maybe
Well, that's
some
where I think
maybe some do, but yeah.
that's where I think the linear component comes in is lifts you're lagging on, lifts you need more time with, lifts that you're not as strong as you'd like to be at, or maybe, like you might have two lifts that are really, if we're using the three competitive lifts for powerlifting, you might have two of the three locked in and conjugate's killing it. But you might turn around and go, oh, I'm just not making progress. Or the variations I've tried to this point are not working. So that means A, you've got to figure out the next variation that works. And B, you might just need more time with it. So
Our paths are very similar. We're, miles and miles apart, but we've both seen kind of the same thing happen out of our gyms. But
mhm.
watching the gym grow and having a lot of different athletes just start showing up. What does that mean to you as a coach?
I don't think there's any better feeling when you see people want to be there and then the people that are there succeed. It's like winning the lottery, like I'm never going to be a rich man and I'm okay with that, but I think I'm rich in a lot of other aspects where I've got an environment that people want to be in, and the guys that are here, they would, they would do anything to be here. They would do anything to help the people they train with. So I think when you get people to buy in and care about what you're doing, um, I don't think there's any better feeling because it generally shows you're doing something right.
I agree with that. As you step back and look and you just think to yourself, why in the world do these kids want to come to an old garage and lift weights? But they show up, and it is very humbling. I heard you say this, and this definitely struck a chord with me, but there's a lot less wrong answers than we're told. They're just stepping stones to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
When did you kind of realize that?
When I first started training, I thought I knew the answers to stuff, right? The first few times you see success, you're like, oh, I figured this out. And then, you start hitting roadblocks and you're not producing the way you want to produce in terms of development or whatever times, scheme you set up for yourself of like, well, I should be here at this point or I should be here at this point. I think that's when you realize, like, I don't know shit. I know some stuff. And then as time goes on, you talk to other people and you learn more. It's kind of one of those things where it's like the more I know, the less I feel I know. And I say that just because I've met so many people, I've seen so many different diverse thought processes in training, and I think they all have some level of merit, especially when they're coming from people who are successful. But I started to realize that generally across the board, all these people that were successful had a lot of things in common. They weren't necessarily to a T the exact thing, but they had a progression to what they were doing. They had great movement competency. They understood what things should look like. There might be a little bit of deviation, but they basically had a checklist that they all met at certain points. So that's when I kind of really started to evaluate it, that a lot of the people are putting out information and saying, well, this is the only way to do this, is because there's monetary gain involved. And anytime money is introduced, anything, it's manipulated, it's changed, it's now working towards that. So, and I mean, there are people out there who make money who are doing great things. And I'm not trying to say anything negative towards that. I'm just saying in general, you look at the way people trained in the 70s, they were strong. You look at the way, athletes trained in the 90s and the 80s, they were strong. They were different. They had different methods, they had different deviations to them, but they still produce results. So if that's not, a catalyst for, well, everything kind of works if you do it right. And I know that sounds strange. Everything kind of works if you do it right, but everything works if you're invested into it and there's a plan in place and that plan meets a checklist. Then yeah, you're going to see benefits doing different programs. You're going to see benefits in different training ideologies. You're going to see, you look at like Chico's programs, they work. And he's got a lot of guys strong that way. You look at Westside, they've got a lot of guys strong that way. 5-3-1's got a lot of people strong. 5x5's got a lot of people strong. Yes, he's 1x20 methods got a lot of people strong. You look at John McCallum's Keys to Progress. There's a lot of different stuff in there too. Larry Pacifico did his own thing. Ernie France did his. So the point I'm trying to say is there's different methodologies in a lot of these things, but they had a lot of the same intangibles there in terms of the structure of their programs, what lift should be performed. Was the volume ramping up? Was the volume ramping down? Was the intensity ramping up? They all have a lot of different things in common. So it's really hard at that point when you've read all these different books and programs. And I think at this point I'm over 200. If they've produced results, then they work. But if they oppose each other and they still work, well, what do they have in common? And once we've kind of bridged that gap, then yeah, we're looking more at a checklist than we are a specific program.
It seems to me like the process is almost the same for everybody. You go through like Dunning-Kruger syndrome, where you think you know a lot more than what you know because you don't know what you don't know. Then you hit imposter syndrome because now you're starting to figure out how much you don't know. And then finally, you just reach a point where you're just okay with what you don't know and you're willing to learn, but you give it the time it takes to get there.
Yeah, it might even seem like you don't give a shit at that point, right? Like it's a non-care attitude. But I'm at the point where if I don't know something, I'm just going to ask. I don't need to impress anybody. I've lived my life. I'm if I'm still trying to impress people at 40 years old, I got a real fucking problem. And I think that's just years of being alive on this earth. So I think what it comes down to is you know what you don't know, and what you don't know you can learn. And if you have that attitude forever, you're always going to advance. If you start turning around and saying, well, this is the only way to do things and everybody else who doesn't agree with me is wrong, then it's over. You failed. But if you're constantly willing to evaluate new information, ask questions, put yourselves in situations where you don't have all the answers, then you're gonna get better. And I'll give you an example of it right here. So this book I've been working on for quite some time, and this is all just different things I've learned, different programs. I've got them coded by like squat, bench, deadlift, athletic programs, full power programs. But I got tons of stuff in here. Some stuff I've written myself, stuff from other people. But I constantly go through it because the big thing I've realized is when you start reading programs, you might find something you like and you'll implement it. And you'll be like, oh, okay, this is great. And then what do? You get more information. I mean, I'm reading this book right now, and this has a lot of great stuff in it. This is Pat O'Shea's Quantum Strength Fitness 2. Great book. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. In 6 months, am I going to remember all that? No, because I'm going to have read something else. So what do I need to do? Take what I found useful or what I think could be useful, find a time to implement it. And then if it's great, throw it in there. And then we have a resource we can flip to the tab and it's right there. So that's kind of been my approach now, is trying to not develop, paralysis from analysis. Like read stuff, learn stuff, but then have a way to find it later instead of trying to flip through 200 books and find that one paragraph about that one specific thing. So, it's really just fundamentally the quest to learn more. Because if you think you know it all, you've lost, because nobody knows it all.
That goes into the next question I had. You're kind of working down my list here, but question everything you're doing as an athlete and as a coach for improvement. I know you were big into skateboarding. We talked about that. You kind of ran counterculture, and then you learned to question everything at a young age. Do you think as you've gotten older, you've learned to even question more?
Yeah, at this point, I question everything. I question every piece of information that's presented to me. Now, if it comes from somebody that I trust and I know, then I'm less likely to evaluate on the hard scope. But I think now more than anything, people have a lot of questions about a lot of things in the world and just in general. I think it's good for you to find your own internal monologue. I'm not saying be dismissive or turn down information, but evaluate why you're being presented it. And if it's from somebody you trust and it's something that is going to benefit you, or you see the value in it, then yeah, of course, obviously explore it. But I think the big issue is most people, and I see this all the time, is people be like, well, what program should I do? It's like, you should maybe start answering these questions yourself. Maybe not as a beginner, but as you start to get in there, you might find you should start answering your own questions, because at the end of the day, programs that are written, they're written and they're great, but they're written by somebody else for their specific needs, for their specific goals. Your goals and my goals may not be the exact same thing. We might have a lot of them in common, but you might need to do something that I don't, or I might need to do something that you don't. And that evaluation only comes from knowing yourself and knowing what you're trying to do.
As I've talked to you more, you know, you've worked with some of the best athletes in the country, maybe even the world. What do they have in common? What has made them so successful? Is there one thing that sticks out with them, or they all have different traits that have made them so great?
The will to want to win. That's it. The will to want to win all the time, to do whatever needs to be done to be the best that you can be at whatever it is. That's really just what it comes down to. And I don't even say that just in athletes. People I met in the military that were super motivated and were successful were motivated to be better. In the fire department, same thing. Like, you're gonna meet people that are just, it's like they have it, whatever it is. Like my buddy Dustin, he's my daughter's godfather. I'm actually his son's godfather. We were in the Navy together. He's the first person I met on the ship. I met him when I was 19. He did 5 years. He went from, I think, E3 to E5, E6 in 5 years. He tried to be a SEAL. He made it all the way through Hell Week, and then his swim partner quit, and he quit. And he tried to go back for 2 years straight every day because he was just like, I was immature. I wasn't able to handle this situation. So he failed out of buds. He made E6 in the Navy pretty quickly. He got out, and now he's a medical doctor. And it's just like, dude, you could do anything and you're going to be successful. So I think it's just wanting to be the best version of yourself, whatever that is, whatever the best version of yourself is, and knowing that you want to achieve it is what these people have in common, whether it's athletic endeavors or personal endeavors, like just not being content with not living up to your potential.
I've thought about this a lot, and I'll get your opinion on it. But physical therapy on the public level is nowhere near what they're doing on these college and pro athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we'll ever see what they're doing to keep athletes healthy and on the field ever come back to the public level, or do you think it'll always just be the insurance gamut that we're seeing?
I think it's heavily liability driven at this point. I think everything is every entity that is not its own system, if that makes sense. Athletes who play sports at a very high level, whether it be professional or collegiate, are in a system that's there to produce results, right? They're not there for the feel good story. If they're a competitive school, they might be. They might offer scholarships for class act people on that alone. But you look at Alabama, it's like everyone in their roster is a 5-star recruit. Well, why? Because they want to win. They want to win. That's what they care about. You look at the pro ranks of any team. They don't sign contracts because they like somebody or they feel good when they enter the room. They sign contracts, and I mean they have in the past, and maybe it hasn't panned out. But when they pick somebody up or offer max deals, it's because they think they bring something to the table that's going to allow them to achieve their goals. I think when you get in the private sector, a lot of things are based around legality. People don't want to get sued. People don't want to be in a position where things maybe are more result driven rather than whatever the corporate needs of that organization are. So they might turn around and, like, body tempering, great intervention. How many PT clinics do you see it at? Does it work? Yeah, we do it all the time in the gym. I went and got certified from Donnie. It was awesome. I learned so much stuff. If I didn't have that in training, I don't know if I'd be still training, or at least at the level I'm at. We use it all the time. You don't see it at commercial PT clinics. Why? Because it's a modality that's outside of their scope of what they deem acceptable. It came up from a guy who is not a doctor. He's a power lifter. And immediately they put scrutiny on that. And it's like, well, it works. Yeah, well, it works, but we don't care because it's not us. It's not peer-reviewed research. It's not, insured. And that's so I to answer your question, I don't think it will ever come back to the commercial side of things. I do not.
I just got in a conversation about this the other day, and it really got me wondering, like, when I was a kid and you'd watch baseball or any sport really, you'd hear this guy's out 6 weeks hamstring. This guy's out 8 weeks oblique. This guy's out 4 weeks turf toe. You don't hear those conversations anymore. So, through tempering and different modalities that they're using, they've cured, I'm not going to say cured, but they've learned to overcome these injuries and get these athletes on the field faster. Yet we're still dealing with a model at the public level that may never get you back to full health.
When I was at the tempering course, my partner, the partner I had sitting at the table with me, was the director of UConn's women's sports. At that point, it was used by multiple MLB teams, multiple NFL teams, NBA, NHL. Now I believe it's part of the. I don't know if it's the Army. I don't know if it's Ranger candidacy. They are using it. It's high level entities are using it. High functioning groups are using it. Like I said, you're not seeing it at private, you know, clinics all over anymore or ever. You don't see groundbreaking stuff at chains, at corporations. Um, and it again, it goes back to that liability issue. But like you said, the schools that are implementing it, the programs that are implementing it, you're not seeing a lot of these nagging soft tissue injuries that are flaring up because they have a modality in house that they use whenever they need to. You know, they like when they were producing them, you'd see like LSU got a set of rollers, Alabama, whoever they Notre Dame I know had some. So it's like they can use this whenever they want. They don't have to pay a clinician to come in. I'm sure the people on staff, learned how to do it. They've probably gone through the certification, but now it's available. And then they show the athletes how to do it. Now the athletes know how to do it, and they're doing it at their own volition whenever they need to. So yeah, you're going to see a lot less of these little naggy things that were big issues 10 years ago show up. And again, I think it just goes back to look at what athletes are paid now. Like look at the money that's invested into these people and their careers. Anything you put money into, anything that you care about, you're going to want to see it, produce and last as long as possible. So that's why it's being implemented. You're seeing these ideas that are, groundbreaking put into these programs and not on the other side, because at the end of the day, public health is it's for money. It's not, it's not to turn around and have a populace that's healthy. It's to make money off of people through, insurances and other things like that. So
With what you said there, yeah, I've heard them say that the quickest way to get an animal off the endangered species list is somehow to make it marketable and breed and sell them on a private level, like
mm-hmm.
like buffalo, different things like that. It's the same thing now. Money is driving the athletic training to keep those guys on the field. If you didn't have millions and millions of dollars invested in these guys, maybe we wouldn't be pushing the envelope in some areas.
I agree.
This one's a little off path of what we've been talking about, maybe, but I've had you on here a while, and I'll start wrapping it up, and maybe this is a good one to do it with. I don't know. But does your calling chase you, or do you have to search for your calling in life?
I think your calling chases you. I think you'll find yourself in positions where you're unhappy or you're doing something that's just not for you. And I think when you find the thing that you're supposed to do, it all makes sense. Some people are happy and content to just, do whatever that is to make money because they have goals outside of that. Some people are super family oriented. And I'm not saying that I'm not. It's just, I think when you have tried so many other things and they just weren't it, or you always had an expectation that, well, I want to be around these type of people. I want to be in this type of environment. It's not here. Well, it'll be at the next place, and it'll be at the next place. And you keep going down the line. And that's how it was for me. The military, I thought I was going to be around high speed individuals all the time. And there were some. I'm not going to sit here and say that they weren't, but I didn't go the special warfare route, and then maybe I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could have. I probably couldn't have. I'll say that straight up because those guys are a whole other level. But my whole conception of my whole thought process of the military was like everybody, because I went in at 18 years old, like right in high school, thought everybody was like the movies. And then you get there, like, okay, there's a few people like this. And then you get to the fire department, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's like this. And well, some fire departments are, not all of them, so you keep going to the thing that you're trying to create this environment or find this environment. You're trying to find it. Well, you have to create it. You have to create the environment you want to be in. So I think that your passion chases you. Some people want to be firemen from when they're kids, right? And they find it, they do that and they're happy and they're where they're at in life. Some people want to be police officers. Some people want to be professional athletes. Some people want to be, doctors or scientists. the only way you know that if it's for you is if you're tested in that environment. If it turns around and you're having the moments where it's not working out or it's not the greatest place for you, or that situation is not the great, you sit there and evaluate and say, well, is this worth continuing on? And for me personally, strength training has just always been sort of that thing that's like, I didn't try to do this. I had other careers outside of it. I wasn't even looking for it. And I kind of was always doing it on the side. And then I was just like, this is the only place I've ever truly felt I was doing the right thing. So I might as well embrace it instead of pushing it off for another 10 years, doing something else, and then turn around and go, why didn't I just listen to that voice? So I think we all have it to some level, you know, and I that then that doesn't go against, you know, the guy who goes in there and punches his clock and wears his hard hat and, you know, brings his lunch pail in and but turns around and gives his kids a great life. That's a hero. That's a real hero, is somebody who does what they need to do to help everyone around them be get to that point, right? You're going to find people in your life who maybe gave up on what that voice was to allow somebody else to have it. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if I rambled there, but you know.
I think it made way more sense than probably what you think. I think when you listen back and hear it, I think it's going to make a lot of sense, especially that end part to me. There are tons of people out there who have quietly stepped back away from their passion to give it to their kids or to their spouse or to their best friend and never said a word about it. Nobody ever knew any different than that.
Yeah, and you look at them and their happiness in life is seeing the people around them be happy, chase their dreams, be content, you know, and it's be content with where they are. So I think there's a lot of people like that, and I don't think they get the credit they deserve because, you know, work is work, right? It's supposed to be work, but now I feel like you see more often people chasing dreams. They're chasing things that they want to do, and they're succeeding at it. So maybe as a culture, we're changing. Maybe this is, you know, a new era for everyone involved in it. But you know, there's a lot of guys I'm sure who just went to work and were just happy to see their kids, you know, wake up on Christmas morning with presents and be happy, or have something on their birthday, or you know, they got to go to college. You know, like I think we all have that person in our life. For me, it was my grandfather. He, you know, he worked. He kind of put his own stuff aside and made sure everybody in his family had what they needed to and chased the dreams that they wanted to. And like I said, looking back, he was my hero. Why? Because he put his needs second to everyone else around him. So, you know, I think you do chase your calling, but I also think some people, you know, their calling is making sure other people reach theirs.
Who's luckier, the young guy that knows his calling from a young age, or the old the old man who had to chase it down and go through a bunch of hard times to find it?
I I don't think either one of them is luckier, and I say that in the sense I think in life you go through what you need to go through to be where you are. And I know that sounds vague, and you know some people have horrible tragedies and hard things they have to overcome. And I'm not sitting here saying that it was justified or needed, but I think every experience you have is to mold you in some way, shape, or form, whatever that is. I always sit there and go, well, if I'd started this 10 years ago, you know, if I'd finished my bachelor's degree 10 years ago, look where I'd be. Well, I wouldn't be the person I am. I wouldn't I wouldn't have the value I have in it if I did it right out of high school. I think going into the military, you know, going on 2 deployments, coming home, struggling financially, working odd jobs, doing everything I could, and then finally getting it years later. I mean, it took me 14 years to get my bachelor's degree. 14 years. I'm like Van Wilder. I was at school forever. You know what I mean? Like you think, oh, you went to school 14 years. What are you, doctor? No, I just have a bachelor's degree. Well, you know, school wasn't my forte. But I look back at it now and I did it. I might have taken the long way. I might have taken the long way around it, but you know what? I did it and I'm proud of it. And, you know, it was worth it. It was worth the struggle. And, you know, that there's people have that with a lot of different things. It's not just education. It could be anything, but I think you go through what you go through in life to become the person that you're supposed to be. So, you know, those who figured it out early on, fucking awesome. Kudos. Great job. You know, go get it. But the person out there who's struggling still not where they want to be, you can't fucking give up. You got to keep grinding because you're going to get there. And when you do, it's going to be sweeter. So I think they have equal amounts of luck or equal amounts of value in both of those situations. Because if you do it earlier on, you've got more time to do it and you've got more opportunity to kind of delve into that. But I also think if you went the long way, you truly appreciate whatever your goal was once you achieve it. So
I had some more questions, but they're not going to be able to top the last two. So I'm going to
fair
save
enough.
them. I'm going to save them for another day
Fair
and,
enough.
and let you enjoy your evening. But man, that was those come about impromptu. They weren't something I had wrote down. So I really appreciate the way you answered them, and we'll let into other things that people could think about.
Oh, you're asking me what other things people can think about. If I were to give advice, I guess is that where we're going with this?
We can for
Okay.
sure. We're already down the road, right?
Fair enough.
Might as
Fair
well.
enough. I think you should be proud of the work you do, whatever it is. Right? If you're out there trying to make your life better or those around you better, you should be proud of whatever it is. If you're training for strength, and I said this before on another podcast, but I think people always turn around and go, "Oh, I'm so weak here. I these are only my lifts, or this is only what I've accomplished." Be fucking proud of that shit because you did it. And I'm not saying just hang your hat on it for the rest of your life, but use it as a stepping stone to move forward to where you want to go. I think right now things are so fucking toxic on social media where people just bash people they don't even know because they have the safety of a device. You wouldn't go say that shit to somebody on the street because they probably knock your ass out. So you know what I'm saying. So you see a lot of toxic environments that shouldn't be toxic. But I think if anybody's pushing for something, they should be proud of what they've accomplished, whether it's weights in the gym or athletic endeavors. You should be proud of the work you've put in, and you should take a look at what you did, evaluate it, and say, how can I be better? What can I do to get to the next level? And then implement that any way you can. And then once you get to where you want to be proud there, but set the next goal. And I also think too, helping people achieve their goals is a big part of that. I think helping other people get to where they want to go. You got to remember somebody this is going to be somebody's first time in a gym. This is going to be somebody's first time in the weight room. This is going to be somebody's first practice on the team. This is going to be somebody's first game. Extend your hand, help them out, let them know that you were in the same situation because I think you truly see the benefit of what you've achieved when you see somebody else achieve it through helping them. Like if you're a high school athlete and you're a senior, help the freshman out, help the kid out who's getting screamed at because his time is slow, or if you're the guy at a powerlifting meet and you've been competing for a long time and you can always spot the guy who's never been there or might not have any handlers, go up to the kid and talk to him. Say, hey, after the meet, if you need a place to train or you need some advice, reach out, because we only see the benefit of what we truly have when we give it to somebody else and we see them develop with it, because people help me, and I'm eternally grateful. I'm eternally grateful to Kenny Toth, Andre Skiba, Joe Calgary, Justin Kavanaugh. There's a lot of Zach Emanesh. There's a lot of people out there who, all the guys in the gym, there's a lot of people that really helped me out. And I just took what they did and I kind of gave it to other people. So, don't be a dick. I guess that's my advice.
The guys on top didn't fall on top.
Exactly.
They had to get there somehow.
And remember, anybody who's ever done anything, you never see people at the top level criticizing people who are working their way up. It's generally somebody who's not involved or somebody who hasn't achieved something, who's got something sour to say. The people who are in the fight, who had to go through that shit, they know what it takes to be good at something. So they're going to turn around and be helpful. They're not going to bash somebody who's at the very beginning of their journey when they might be middle way through or at the end of it, because they know what it was like to go through those steps. The people who haven't done it, those are the people who boo the loudest,
Yes.
Cheap seats, if you will.
The ones with the least amount of skin in the game.
Exactly.
Well, Coach, I appreciate all the time. We've been setting this up for a while, and I'm glad we finally got to sit down and do it. It it took on some really good twists that I wasn't expecting, and so I really appreciate that.
I had a great time. I apologize for the rudeness of all my pets. They're just doing their thing. You can only mitigate what you can mitigate. But yeah, I had a great time. Thanks for having me on. You're putting out a lot of great stuff with your book and on Instagram. You've been killing it. So if anybody's looking for some good stuff, Stacking Losses, it's on Amazon. It's by Stephen Thompson. Check it out. There's your plug.
I appreciate that plug. I really do. Hopefully, hopefully it helps a kid out there somewhere that might be dealing with some stuff that nobody knows about.
I liked it. I really enjoyed it. And I say that because it's not like a lot of the other stuff I would read in terms of like strength training, but it made me take a look at how I interact with people like the guys out in the gym on just, a daily basis, because that book, I think, is everybody knows a scenario that happened or somebody that happened to a similar one. So it's a lot more common, I think, than people think about. People just look at the people on teams and go, oh, look how happy they are. But I think that book, it really resonated with me. So great job on it. It's a super short read too, but it hits home pretty hard. So.
Well, I appreciate that. You didn't have to do that for me, but this was not rehearsed. So thank you very much.
No, but you know what I mean? Like, we've talked about so many other good books and stuff out there that I found interesting. And like I said, that book wasn't directly about programming or any strength stuff, but you find stuff in there. You find that one or two things, and now you can implement it, So that's kind of what we were talking about earlier on. You're going to read stuff that might not be your cup of tea. You're going to have podcasts with people, as you said, that may not have the exact ideologies that you do, but you're going to find stuff that's useful. So, maybe overturn that stone, maybe look in that direction that you would not normally look, because you might find a gem there. So
you might find some gold.
That's it. Yeah.
It may be, I've heard guys talk about finding some real gems in Better Housekeeping back in the old days when that was out,
Yep.
You don't know where the information is, just that you get a hold of it.
Yeah. And the only way you find that is if you have an open mind.
I agree with that 100%. And I know as I get older, it seems like my mind gets more open.
Yeah. It's exactly what we were talking about, right? Like, you get that point in life where you think you know everything, and then you realize, well, I don't know half of what I thought I knew, but at least now I know how to find what I need to find. And that's just through, like we said, having an open mind. That's that you got to have the will to want to be better, to become better.
There has to be an internal drive. Well, Coach, I know you got other things to do besides this, but the time was amazing. I love the content that we covered. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me on. It was an absolute blast, and I look forward to all the stuff you're doing in the future.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your week.
Hey, you too. Thank you.